שם טעם מאוד, יש שם טעם מאוד, כל העולם כולו, יש שם טעם מאוד, יש שם טעם מאוד.
Oh, those boys are great. That's the Boys Town Choir of Jerusalem singing Am Yisrael High. How are you, my holy brothers and sisters? A Shavua Tov, a good week to you. A Chodesh Tov, a good month to you. We're starting the new Hebrew month of Heshvan. How are you, everybody? Let's light up the darkness. Who is with us on this fine Sunday night? Yehuda from Florence, South Carolina, Stephen from Dover, New Hampshire, Melissa from Great Neck, Paula from Chicago, Harold from Oregon, Michelle from Junction City, Kansas, Ann says shalom, Nancy from Southern Pines, Betty from Idaho, Joy says shalom from New Jersey, Pauline from Arkansas, Pam from Nashville, Harry from Colchester, Connecticut. If it's your first time tuning in to AT Daily, let us know so we can welcome you. Toby says, my wife and I, northeast of San Antonio. Jacob from Nebraska. Crystal from Canada. Brandon from Knoxville. Catherine from Silicon Valley. Rochelle from Modesto. Moses from West Africa at 2:15 a.m. Wow! Welcome, Moses. Great to have you with us. Lori from Toronto, James from Indianapolis, Martin from Louisiana, Vaughn from Ohio, Yonatan from Chicago, ducking and dodging bullets as we speak. Oh my, I hope that's just, not literal. But anyway, so Brenna from Massachusetts, Michael from Torrance, Leah from Fort Myers, Jose, what was that song? Am Yisrael High, the nation of Israel will live forever, sung by this boys choir out of Jerusalem, the Boys Town Choir. Stephanie says Shalom Aleichem, and Dawn is with us from NOLA. Jeff from Caldwell, New Jersey. Jose from Guatemala. Bienvenido, Jose. Qué bueno que estás con nosotros. Nicholas from Portland. Barbara from Orlando. Patricia from Chicago. Kathy from Melbourne, Australia. We really are an international crew today. It's wonderful to have you. Lucy from Minnesota. Dawn says, first time. Woohoo. Welcome, Dawn. Great to have you. Eric from Toronto. Paul is a first-timer from Chicago. Welcome, Paul. Owen from New York City. Craig from Chicago. Man, they're coming in faster than I can catch up to the end. Martine from the Netherlands. Welcome, Martine. Chaim from Charlotte. Yosef from Lowell. Michelle and Moshe from New Jersey. And John is with us from Sedona. Welcome, everybody. It's great to have you. All right, today we're finally going to complete our discussion of the first Mishnah in chapter 6 of this tractate, Eruvin, the third volume of the Talmud. We are on page 69, that's Daf Samech Tes. This is actually a very well-known page in the Talmud. Some of the rulings that we're going to be discussing today come up in a lot of other contexts. And some of this material is a little bit challenging. And right now, I don't mean technically challenging. It's actually a little bit of emotionally challenging. We're going to be discussing under what conditions can a Jew lose the status of a Jew. Now, that doesn't sound like what it sounds like. I mean, that doesn't actually reflect what it sounds like. A Jew, somebody who becomes a Jew because they're born as a Jew or they convert to Judaism, they're going to be a Jew for the rest of their lives, no matter what. A Jew is a Jew, and a Jew is obligated in the mitzvahs, right? When God gave the Torah at Sinai, God appeared in this world, a manifestation, a miraculous manifestation before 2 million people. There's nothing mythological about that. You can't make up a lie that involves 2 million people. No conspiracy theory could tolerate having 2 million people involved if it wasn't true. This happened. It happened about 3,300 years ago. And when God appeared before the assembled Jewish people at Mount Sinai and issued the 10 Commandments, and with them the Torah, both the written Torah and the oral Torah. So along with this statement and this relationship and this covenant which was created between God and the Jewish people, came the commandments. Came the commandments. What can we do? We didn't ask for it. We didn't sign on the dotted line. We didn't agree to this contract. We're born into it, or we convert into it, right? There are Jews by choice. But once you're a Jew, you are bound by those commandments. Now, a person can choose not to obey the commandments. Obviously, that's the whole point of the system. Everyone has a free choice to choose it or not. So a Jew is a Jew and is always going to be bound by the commandments. But as we'll see, there are certain Jews, because of their actions, who in certain limited contexts are not going to retain the status of a Jew when their actions impact others. And as we'll see, it's extremely problematic to label somebody as one of these people who has lost their status of a Jew. It's actually something that's largely between them and God, but in certain conditions we have to be very careful of who we're dealing with and how we're dealing with them. So we're going to get to that over the course of this page. It's a sensitive topic. I'm saying that up front. It's a sensitive topic. It definitely is intensely related to Shabbos observance. So that's, we're in Tractate Eruvin, right, which is the laws of creating a sort of spiritual space, either where people can carry further in one direction, and can walk further in one direction, right? That's an eruv joining the Shabbos boundary, eruv techumen, or creating a place where Jews can carry on Shabbos, because normally you can't carry from a private domain out into a public domain on Shabbos. That's prohibited, but we can enlarge the size of the private domain, as it were, so that we can carry, a bottle of wine to our friend's house on Shabbos if the eruv has been created, and then it's going to be possible because it's like we're sharing a private domain. So that's the general body of law that we're studying. It has to do with Shabbos observance. And Shabbos is just a very big, it's a very big set of obligations, big in terms of number of rules that pertain to Shabbos observance, and big in the sense that it's one of the 10 Commandments. Often, in many ways, look, I was not always a frum Yid. I was not always an Orthodox Jew. There's much of my life when I was not. And I felt like I was, definitely a good person, and there was lots of things that I was doing, and over time I got very involved in Judaism, but I still wasn't a Shomer Shabbos Jew, as Walter Sobchak would say in The Big Lebowski. I wasn't Shomer Shabbos yet. I wasn't keeping Shabbos properly. I was sort of on my way there, but I wasn't there yet. But being Shomer Shabbos is a big one. And a lot of people will say, well, I'm a 10 Commandments Jew. And what they mean is they don't murder, they don't steal, they really try to tell the truth as often as possible. And those are wonderful and important and good things. But keeping Shabbos is one of the 10 Commandments, and it's a very important one. Now, if you've been with us for a while, you know that Nina and I, we share Jewish wisdom with the world. Half of our community is not even Jewish. We are very much about this and not about this. We're just not this kind of people. However, we always acknowledge that we would have appreciated, and we did appreciate, when people told us, look, you are obligated. You're a Jew and you're obligated. And you should really look into, getting yourself to a point of keeping Shabbos where you can say you're keeping Shabbos properly. And we will tell you that our lives were transformed by that in an infinitely beneficial and positive way. It was wonderful for us when we were finally keeping Shabbos properly. And I'm not here to lecture you. But today, you're going to hear some information, that a Jew just needs to know, right? So then you make your own choices, but when you make your choice, it's an informed choice. So let's go on. All right, so back on Daf Samech Aleph, page 61, that's when we started chapter 6 of Tractate Eruvin. And by the way, I think there's probably going to be comments and questions today, so put them in the comments and questions. I'm going to get through the teaching, and then I will definitely make some time to address comments and questions at the end. Okay, so we're on page 69. 8 pages ago is when we started our discussion of the first Mishnah of chapter 6. And the Mishnah was talking about what happens, when Jews share a courtyard with a non-Jew. That's what the general topic of this first Mishnah is. And as we've seen, we've gone off on some wonderful and very varied digressions in our discussion of that Mishnah. But the basic rule was that when 2 Jews share a courtyard, right? So it's like 2 houses share a courtyard. It's a private courtyard, but the residents of 2 houses have rights in that courtyard. So they must form an eruv in order to be able to carry objects out of their house and into their private courtyard, because people who live in that other house, who don't live in your house, they have rights in your courtyard, and therefore it's sort of like a little bit like even your private courtyard. Since you share it with another house, it takes on the nature of a public domain, and so you must join in an eruv for purposes of Shabbos. So now that for purposes of carrying on Shabbos, you're joint owners of the courtyard, and you did that by putting some food, a little bit of food, into a basket for each of the homeowners, and then put that basket in one of the houses. And then if a non-Jew lives in that courtyard, if it's a Jew and a non-Jew, then the Jew doesn't have to do anything, because the other person who lives in his courtyard is not bound by Shabbos. He's not obligated in Shabbos like he is. But if there's 2 Jews and a Gentile living in that courtyard, the Jews must make an eruv with each other, and they have to rent the rights of the non-Jew. They have to make an official arrangement with the non-Jew. The non-Jew loses nothing. He can do whatever he's going to do. He's not affected by this. But the Jews have to make an official arrangement with him whereby they rent the rights of the non-Jew in the courtyard, and they can give him a penny for those rights. And so now, they have a right, for sure, a, confirmed right to carry in their courtyard. It's not limited by the fact that this non-Jew also lives with them, and so they can carry on Shabbos. That's what the Mishnah was about. But then there was a story told at the end of the Mishnah that we haven't discussed until now, and we're gonna discuss it now. Right now, this story talks about that Rabban Gamliel, right, when he was growing up, the members of his in the house where he grew up. So Rabban Gamliel was a famous sage, and he was this sort of chief rabbi. He was the Nasi, the chief of all the rabbis. When he was growing up, his home was in a courtyard that shared an alley. So just as we join houses in an eruv within a courtyard, we join courtyards that all open into a common alleyway, and they can join each other so that carrying is permitted between the courtyards through the alleyway on Shabbos. So in this alleyway where there were several courtyards, where all Jews lived, there was also a courtyard where a tzadduki lived, which is a Hebrew for a Sadducee. So the first question that the Gemara asks here is, well, we were talking about a non-Jew. Why are we now talking about a Sadducee? A Sadducee is a Jew. What is a Sadducee? What was a Sadducee? Similar to the Boethusians. Okay, so these were essentially renegade sects of the Jews. They were Jews who said, well, we're Jewish, but we don't hold by what everybody else holds by. And specifically, they said, well, we submit to the commandments that are in the written Torah, but we don't believe that there was an oral Torah given at the same time at Mount Sinai, and that was transmitted by God to Moses, and from Moses to Joshua, and from Joshua to the elders, from the elders to the prophets, and eventually from the prophets to the men of the Great Assembly, and then from them through the rabbinic tradition until now. What is the oral tradition? It's the Talmud. It's what we're all learning together. Some of the laws that are in the Talmud, that are in the Mishnah, were originally given at Mount Sinai. So for example, tefillin, right? So the black boxes that we put one on the arm and the black straps and one on the forehead and the black straps. And a Jewish man is obligated to put those on every day and to say a blessing. In the Torah, the written Torah, it just says, you will bind these words, the words of the basic prayer, the Shema, you will bind these words as a sign upon your hand and as a symbol before your eyes. That's all it says. What does that mean? How do you bind words as a symbol on your hand or a symbol in front of your eyes? The answer is tefillin. But what tefillin were was shown to Moses at Mount Sinai, and he passed down that tradition. So it's like the core rulings of the Mishna, of the oral tradition, were given at Mount Sinai and transmitted all the way through. The Sadducees were this sect who said, no, we don't believe that. They chose not to believe that. You'll notice there are no Sadducees today. They died out, didn't work out so well for them. At any rate, Rabban Gamliel and his family shared an alleyway with a certain Sadducee, and he didn't join in the eruv with the rest of the members of the courtyards that opened up into that alleyway. He didn't care, right? He didn't hold by eruv, which is a rabbinic concept, so he wasn't going to join in the eruv. But he understood that he was causing a problem for other people, so he renounced his rights to carry in the alleyway so that the rest of the members could make an eruv that was valid and that would work. But about that renunciation of rights, which, by the way, right there you see that the Sadducee is not like a Gentile, right? Because a Gentile who didn't participate, he can't participate in joining an eruv, he also can't renounce his rights by saying orally, I renounce my rights. A Jew can do that, a Gentile can't. In order to get those rights from the Gentile, we actually have to do a little bit of a formal arrangement where we rent those rights, right? We give him a penny, there's an exchange. He says, I rent, okay, you can have the rights, I take the penny from you, thank you, you're welcome, good, it's done. But when a Jew doesn't join in the eruv, for example, he forgets, and then it's Shabbos, and all of a sudden nobody can carry because everyone joined the eruv except this one guy, the Jew can renounce his rights even at that point. He won't be able to carry in the alley. He won't be able to carry throughout that eruv, but everybody else will because he will no longer restrict them. He won't prohibit them since there's somebody who has rights in that alleyway that didn't join the eruv. That would prohibit everybody from carrying in the eruv. So the Sadducee renounced his rights. That shows that he's like a Jew. The Sadducee is a Jew and has the status of a Jew in that he can renounce rights. But in the story, in our Mishnah, Rabban Gamliel's father said, hurry up and carry something out into that alleyway, lest the Sadducee carry something into the alleyway. Now, he's renounced his rights to carry in the alleyway. If he then carries into the alleyway, it's like he retracted that renunciation of rights, and now all the other people in their courtyards are going to be restricted on Shabbos from carrying in that alleyway. So in the story, Rabban Gamliel's father said, go out and carry something into the alleyway to sort of confirm and establish your rights that the eruv is working before he brings something out there and it's canceled. And then Rabbi Yehuda said, no, that's not how the story went. The story was different. Rabbi Yehuda says that what Rabban Gamliel's father said was, you better hurry up, and anything you need to do to carry through the alley, in the alley, out to the alley, from the alley, get it done before Shabbos begins, because once Shabbos starts at nightfall, you're not going to be able to carry anymore. The eruv won't be valid. Now that might suggest that the Sadducee does not have the status of a Jew in his ability to renounce rights. He's more like a Gentile, where if they didn't rent the rights, then the rights didn't change hands, as it were, and everybody remains restricted. So that's kind of what's in play here. What is the status of that Sadducee? is he a Jew who can renounce his rights, and it's a good renunciation, but perhaps if he retracts, it's going to be a problem? Or is he a Jew that for some reason cannot renounce his rights? That's what's being analyzed in the Gemara, commenting on this story in our Mishnah. Okay, very good. So now the Gemara says, the Gemara brings another teaching, a baraisa, right? So the baraisas are contemporaneous with the Mishnahs, but just a hair less authoritative than the Mishnahs. The baraisa says that a Gentile, a Sadducee, and a Boethusian restrict us from carrying in an alley, sort of puts them all together. Rabban Gamliel says the Sadducee and the Boethusian do not prohibit us, and then tells the same story from our Mishnah in the Baraisa. The story of Rabban Gamliel's father who said, hurry and take out and bring in, but now it's worded a little bit differently. And now in the Baraisa, Rabban Gamliel's father says, hurry and take out and bring in before that loathsome one retracts and prohibits you. Now, this is the story about Rabban Gamliel's father as told by Rabbi Meir. So Rabbi Meir is saying, unlike in the Mishnah, he wasn't saying, bring in, hurry and take something out into the alley, because if you do it first, before he sort of retracts the renunciation of rights that he made by then carrying something into the alley. He said he wasn't going to carry. He renounced his rights to carry in the alley. Then he carries in the alley. But if you carried something into the alley first, it's like the eruv got fixed, and then it's good for all of Shabbos, no matter what the Sadducee might do. That's how it seemed to read in the Mishnah. In this Baraisa, according to Rabbi Meir, what Rabban Gamliel's father said is more similar to what Rabbi Yehuda said in the Mishnah. Here he's saying, just hurry up and do whatever you need to do. Take stuff out, bring stuff in, whatever you need to do, get it done, because as soon as he takes something out, even if you did something first, even if you did it on Shabbos and established the eruv, as soon as he carries something into the alley, by his action, he demonstrates that he is retracting his renunciation of the rights. And then the eruv won't be good anymore. So get your stuff done, because this Sadducee, we can't count on him, right? He doesn't submit to the authority of the rabbis. We don't trust him that he's going to renounce his rights. And then since he doesn't really care about the law, how meticulous is he going to be to make sure he doesn't carry something in that alley all during Shabbos? Because as soon as he does, he demonstrates that he is not abiding by his promise to renounce his rights and not carry there on Shabbos. And since he's a Jew, he could renounce his rights. And since he's a Jew, once he renounces his rights, he can't carry in the alley. And once he does carry in the alley, well, then he didn't renounce his rights anymore. He's taken his rights back, as it were. Okay. Rabbi Yehuda in the Baraisa says that Rabban Gamliel's father said, hurry and do whatever you need to do before nightfall. Because as soon as Shabbos begins, you're restricted. In other words, the eruv is not valid. The fact that he renounced rights to you never worked. Perhaps because he's a Sadducee, perhaps because he could retract at any time. For whatever the reason we're going to hold, and we're going to further analyze this, the eruv is no good if it's based on the fact that the Sadducee who shares an alleyway with us renounced his rights to carry in the alleyway on Shabbos. In another Mishnah, per Rabbi Meir, we learn that one who renounces his rights, a Jew who renounces his rights in a courtyard, for example, or in an alleyway, but let's say in a courtyard, one who renounces his rights to carry in a courtyard, and then he does carry in the courtyard, so his renunciation is canceled, right? This is what we've been assuming, but here it is in a Mishnah. So one who says, I renounce my rights in the courtyard, and then he shouldn't carry for the rest of Shabbos something out of his house and into the courtyard. But then he does carry something out of his house and into the courtyard. So then his renunciation of rights is canceled. And the people who were depending on that renunciation of rights, because they all joined in an eruv except for this one guy, right? And so he restricts all of them. They have no eruv because one of them didn't join. Then he renounced his rights. Then the eruv was good. Then he carried into the alley, showing that he canceled he took his rights back. He canceled the renunciation of rights. He took his rights back. So then, now he violated Shabbos. This guy is not allowed to carry on Shabbos. None of them are, as long as one guy didn't join in the alley, but he did it anyway. So it's canceled, and he prohibited, according to Rabbi Meir, he renounced his rights, then he carried. His renunciation is canceled, whether he did it intentionally or unintentionally. Rav Yosef says, actually, Rabbi Meir's statement should read, he does not render it prohibited. Right? Like he renounced his rights, and then he carried, and he doesn't ruin it for everyone else. That's how the Mishnah should read, says Rav Yosef. Abaye says, okay, this is not difficult. Once the other residents take possession, the Jew who renounced may no longer retract. So this is where we get that idea that we saw in the original wording in our Mishnah that we're discussing, that Rabban Gamliel's father said to the people in the courtyards of that alleyway, hurry up and take something out into the alleyway, because once you carry in it, once you rely on the eruv to carry something, then the Jew who renounced his rights can no longer take his rights back. He can no longer cancel that renunciation, according to Abaye's reading of that Mishnah. So this discussion actually goes on for quite a while. And as you know, I don't cover every beat that's on every daf that we study. This is our shir, our class. AT Daily is really about doing highlights of each page so that we can go in deeper on certain points. But let me read to you what the law actually is on this question that has become accepted as written out by Rav Steinsaltz. With regard to a person who renounced his rights, so it's a Jew who renounced his rights, only a Jew can renounce his rights, and subsequently carried something into the alleyway, if he did so inadvertently, he did it by mistake, right? He renounced his rights, and then he just forgot that he renounced his rights, and without thinking about it, he picked up something in his house and carried it outside into his backyard, right? It's a courtyard that he shares with another house, but it's just his backyard. You could see how easily a person could make this mistake. If he did so inadvertently, his act of renunciation does not render carrying prohibited for the residents of the alleyway. So here it's even bigger than a courtyard. It's several courtyards that share an alleyway. However, if he did so intentionally, his action renders it prohibited to carry, as stated by Rabbi Yehuda, since the halacha is in accordance with his opinion in disputes with Rabbi Meir. If the residents of the alleyway had already taken possession of the alleyway, he can no longer reconsider, in accordance with the statement of Rabbi Yehuda in the Baraisa. So as we see, in the case of a Jew who renounced his rights, if he then carries something by mistake, it doesn't affect everybody else. If he carries something on purpose, he does it intentionally, it's like he canceled his renunciation and everyone is going to be prohibited. However, if before he carried intentionally, somebody else who was permitted under the eruv carried out there into the alleyway, then it's like they established the eruv for everybody else. This guy is going to be guilty of violating a rabbinic prohibition, but he's not going to cancel the eruv for everybody else. Now, with regard to the tzadduki, the Sadducee, if he renounces his rights and people carry into the alley and then he carries, is the eruv invalidated? It would seem that according to what we just read, no. He's a Jew who renounced his rights, and then people relied on that and carried something into the alleyway. And then when he carries later, it's like it's too late. He announced his intention with his action to retract that renunciation of rights, but it's too late. They already relied on it and carried something into the alley, so it was established. On the other hand, because he's a Sadducee, because he's a Sadducee, maybe his status is different than just a regular Jew. Maybe, so we can ask, was the eruv ever valid? If not, perhaps that's why Rabbi Yehuda's version of the story in the Mishna says, do your business now before nightfall, because once the Shabbos begins, the eruv is no good. We can't rely on this guy and his renunciation of rights. So what is the status of the Sadducee when he renounces his rights in the alleyway? Is it a valid renunciation or not? Now, the Gemara says that we need to distinguish one Sadducee from another. It's not that this rule is going to be the same for anybody who calls himself a Sadducee. Just the fact that you're a Sadducee is not enough. We actually have to go a little bit deeper. And now we're going to introduce this word, a mummer. A mummer. A mumar. You could pronounce it mumar. I was listening to Rabbi Ceruli Bornstein teach this daf earlier today. So in more yeshivish speak, it's a mummer, right? So the mummer, Rav Steinsaltz translates as an apostate. Okay, an apostate. A Yisrael mummer is an apostate Jew. So what is an apostate Jew? Okay, so an apostate Jew is something that we're going to come to understand in this discussion. And there seems to be two kinds of apostate, right? There's the apostate who, in the case of Shabbos, desecrates Shabbos in private, versus the apostate Jew who desecrates Shabbos publicly. And these two people are going to have a different status. One who desecrates Shabbos privately is going to be regarded differently than one who desecrates Shabbos publicly. That is what we're going to see here. And then the Baraisa, and then what it seems to say, according to the Gemara, that the apostate, the one who desecrates Shabbos privately, okay, like he doesn't keep by Shabbos, but he knows he's doing something wrong, so he keeps it to himself. He is essentially feeling holy shame. He can renounce his rights, and it's a valid renunciation of rights, and we can base our eruv on that. But the one who desecrates Shabbos publicly, doesn't care to follow the laws of Shabbos, and doesn't care who knows it, that's a different category. And when that person renounces his rights to carry in the alleyway or in the courtyard, it is not a valid renunciation. The Baraisa, we have a Baraisa that also says a mummer, right, an apostate, or a gilui panim, a brazen-faced person, may not renounce their rights. So the Gemara asks, well, what is the difference between an apostate Jew and a brazen-faced Jew? What is the difference between them? It would seem that they're both doing it publicly, right? Is that what it means? What is brazen-faced? So Rabbi Yehuda says, what we're talking about is the brazen-faced apostate, right? Meaning the apostate who does it publicly. That's brazen-facedness, right? That person is brazen. That person doesn't care who sees him sinning. That person doesn't care who looks at him and sees that he's separating himself from his people according to the laws of Shabbos. That person is brazen, and from him, we do not accept that he renounces his rights. We can't base an eruv on his renunciation of rights. We'll have to enter into some kind of more formal agreement with him, not just the oral renunciation of rights. But the one who is not brazen-faced, meaning the one who desecrates Shabbos privately, from him we will accept the renunciation of rights. And then we get a little bit more we get a little bit more descriptive about who is brazen-faced and who is not, right? Who is the public desecrator? Who is the public transgressor? Who is this public apostate? How do we know? How do we distinguish one from another? So there was a story involving Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya. So Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya was the grandson of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, right? So Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, known as Rebbe, was the great sage who set down the Mishna, right? Collected the Mishna and put it on paper. Why did he do that? Because of the Roman oppression. It was so intense. He was afraid that all of the sages would be murdered by the Romans and all this knowledge would be lost to the Jewish people. So he said, well, we better write it down. Now, it was written down in a very terse, almost coded way, and it still required, the oral transmission from teacher to student in order to be understood. But that first codification of the oral law is what's known as the Mishnah. Okay, so Rebbe did that. His son was Rabban Gamliel, who we're talking about. So when we say that Rabban Gamliel's father told them to hurry up and get something in the alley before the Sadducee carries something into the alley. So we're talking about Rebbe, right? Rebbe. And Rabban Gamliel's son is Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya. So this is 3 generations of tremendous, tremendous sages in our history. Okay, and Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya, his students included the great Rabbi Yochanan. We've done a Meet the Mensch session on Rabbi Yochanan. And his great friend and partner in learning, Reish Lakish. They were both students of Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya. So when we talk about Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya, we're talking about an extremely prominent sage, not just a sage, but a tzaddik, a righteous person, somebody who was living life on another plane, really dedicated to doing good for in the world and for the people. So there was a person who wore a coral ring in a public domain on Shabbos, which is not permitted according to the rabbis. I don't even remember the reason right now. We covered this in Tractate Shabbos when we went through it. I can't remember the reason right now, but a coral ring is something that you cannot wear on Shabbos. It is not considered jewelry. You can wear jewelry on Shabbos, but you can't wear a coral ring. I can't remember if it was because it's not considered appropriate for a man to wear a coral ring because it's a woman's ornament, or because it has to do more with work. And it's a kind of thing that you would use as a seal. I can't remember what the reason was. I'm not going into it now. The point is, you're not allowed to wear a coral ring in the public domain on Shabbos. This person was wearing such a ring on Shabbos. But when he saw Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya approaching him, he covered up the ring, right? He knew that he was doing something wrong, and he covered it up because he felt a little bit of shame, in the presence of this great tzaddik, this great righteous, saintly man, Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya. And so we learn that one who, feels this kind of bashfulness, right? When he's committing a transgression, right? He's violating a rabbinic prohibition. Or it might even be a biblical prohibition. I mean, we can't carry on Shabbos. That's a Torah prohibition, and this coral ring fits into that. So the rabbis might have decreed it, but it might actually be a biblical transgression. At any rate, you can't do it. And in the presence of this saintly, righteous man, Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya, he covered it up. So that person is not brazen-faced. That person is not a public apostate. That person is not someone who desecrates Shabbos publicly. And therefore, that is a Jew who, if he renounced his rights to us to carry in a courtyard, we would accept that renunciation and we could make our eruv and everybody else could carry in it. Obviously, it would be much better if he just joined the eruv before Shabbos. But if for some reason he forgot to deposit his food and now none of us can carry because he didn't join the eruv, at least we can go to him and say, will you renounce your rights to us to carry on Shabbos? He says, yes, I do. Then we can rely on that. Right? But if it's somebody who would, say, oh yeah, I do have a coral ring. What do you think about that, Rabbi? That would be a person who we do not accept his renunciation of rights. And then the eruv would not work if we needed him to join it because he shared a courtyard or an alleyway with us. Rav Huna says, who is an apostate? Now here he's not saying public apostate or private apostate. He's just saying the term, the Yisrael Mumar. Who is the apostate Jew? according to Rav Huna, one who desecrates Shabbos in public. Rav Nachman says, well, Rav Huna, when you say that, whose opinion are you following? Are you following Rabbi Meir? Now, Rabbi Meir says, a person who violates any commandment publicly, we have a concern that he might violate all the commandments. Anybody who's willing to be public, that we observe him violating a Torah commandment, we're going to be concerned that he violates all the commandments. Or, says Rabbi Nachman, to Rav Huna, are you basing your ruling that one who desecrates Shabbos is an apostate Jew? Are you basing that ruling on the rabbis who dispute Rabbi Meir? Because the rabbis who dispute Rabbi Meir, they say that one who violates any particular commandment is not suspected of violating all the other commandments unless the commandment that he violates publicly, that he's been observed violating publicly, is worshiping idols, avodah zarah. One who worships idols, a Jew who becomes an idolater, right? Who pours wine on an idol or brings an offering to an idol or bows to an idol or in whatever way worships idols. I mean, that violates, right, the first two commandments of the 10 commandments. We know that God does not like it when Jews worship idols. It is tantamount to murder and rape. So, a Jew who engages in idol worship, the rabbis say, him we suspect that he might violate all the commandments. He doesn't hold by Torah at all. But if we see somebody violating any other particular commandment, we're not going to be... So maybe he made a mistake and he violated that commandment. It doesn't mean that he's somebody who doesn't hold by the Torah, say the rabbis who dispute Rabbi Meir. So that's why Rav Nachman was asking Rav Huna, well, who do you say, according to who do you base your ruling that one who desecrates Shabbos is an apostate Jew? How broad is that statement? So Rav Nachman bar Yitzhak says, well, Rav Huna was not making a broad statement. He was simply saying that one who publicly desecrates Shabbos is somebody that we can't count on to renounce his rights in a Shabbos eruv, right? If he desecrates Shabbos publicly, so we shouldn't, accept him renouncing his rights in an alleyway or in a courtyard so that we can establish our eruv for Shabbos. And we have a Tosefta that says one who violates Shabbos in the marketplace, meaning in public, may not renounce his rights. So that would seem to support Rav Nachman's understanding of Rav Huna's statement, who is an apostate Jew, one who desecrates Shabbos publicly. What he meant by that is one who desecrates Shabbos publicly, we may not, like an apostate Jew for the purposes of eruv, we may not accept his renouncing rights for Shabbos, for the eruv. Okay. We also note that a Jew may renounce his rights just by saying so. He says to the other people in the eruv, I renounce my rights. That's all and it's done. They say, will you renounce your rights to us? Yes, I do. So it's done. When you rent the rights, right, which you have to do with a Gentile, possibly with the apostate Jew, we're not sure, you have to, do you rent the rights to us? Yes, I do. Take this. And we give him some item of value to make a kinyan so that there is an actual transfer of an object. No matter how nominal in value, there's some action of taking hold, taking possession. Since he takes the possession of that penny, let's say, we now receive those rights. They're rented, and the eruv is valid. Rav Ashi says, actually, Rav Huna was making a general statement. One, according to Rav Ashi, the way he understands Rav Huna, who is an apostate Jew, one who violates Shabbos publicly, the way Rav Ashi interprets that is that, no, Rav Huna was making a general statement. One who desecrates Shabbos publicly is like one who worships idols. And as we've seen, one who worships idols, that's as bad as it gets, right? That is as bad as it gets. Now, what does it mean that one who desecrates Shabbos publicly is like one who worships idols, and that one who worships idols the rabbis say, well, we suspect him of rejecting the whole Torah and doesn't hold by any of the commandments. So this is a person who has the din of a goy. In other words, this is a person who has the status of a Gentile rather than the status of a Jew. What does that mean? It comes up here in the law of eruv. He can't renounce his rights for the eruv. So that's why it came up in our discussion here. Where else does this come up? So for example, kosher meat, right? For meat to be kosher, it has to be shechted properly. It has to be slaughtered properly. Who can slaughter a cow properly? First of all, you need to be trained to make the cut exactly right? It's a very exact cut with a very exact sharp knife. They train for years to be able to do that. But even with all the training, even if you make the exact cut properly, the person who slaughters a cow for it to become kosher meat has to be a Jew. A Gentile, even with all the training in the world, even if he makes exactly the same cut across the throat of the cow, does everything correctly, that is not kosher meat. That animal is not slaughtered properly. And then, we can't eat it. And in fact, that's considered a nevela. It's not kosher for eating. It can never be eaten. And it's a carcass that if we touch it, it contracts ritual impurity in the same way as if the cow died a natural death. It's not that the Gentile did something wrong. It's just that for it to be kosher meat, it has to be slaughtered by a Jew. If an apostate Jew who desecrates Shabbos publicly, or who worships idols, or who rejects the whole Torah, shechs the cow, also it's a nevela. It does not become kosher meat. We can't eat it. We can't touch it. Interesting. When the temple is standing, Gentiles can bring offerings. A Gentile can bring an offering to be offered on the altar in the holy temple. That is not limited to Jews only. Jews obviously can bring offerings that the priests will offer on the altar in the holy temple in Jerusalem. Non-Jews can bring offerings that are offered on the altar in the holy temple in Jerusalem, but apostate Jews cannot. One who desecrates Shabbos publicly, one who worships idols, one who rejects the Torah and violates all kinds of precepts willy-nilly. If he rejects the whole Torah, he cannot bring an offering. Now, a person who sins certainly can bring an offering. A Jew who sins can bring an offering, right? The only sin that puts him outside the fold. Why? Because, many of the offerings are sin offerings. We want them to bring an offering because it's going to be part of his teshuvah, part of his repentance, part of his atonement, so that he can, get over the sin, as it were. And even one, by the way, who's worshipped idols or who has desecrated Shabbos publicly, once he stops doing that, can bring an offering. Sure, he can. But one who is, on an ongoing basis showing that he doesn't care about the Ten Commandments, doesn't care about the Torah, violates the very worst thing, worshiping idols. And here we're told one who's desecrating Shabbos publicly, one who doesn't care who sees him violating Shabbos publicly, that person cannot bring an offering on the altar when the Holy Temple is standing in Jerusalem. I mentioned that. Now, I mentioned this before, and I'm going to mention it again. So when I listened to Rabbi Shuli Bornstein teach this daf, he added that there was a ruling from a gadol, from a great rabbi in the 19th century. Now, in the 19th century, there were a lot of issues with the Haskalah, with the Enlightenment. And so, just like today, you just had huge numbers of Jews leaving Judaism. Right? Why? Because the Enlightenment was drawing them. The Enlightenment is like, science answers everything. Now we have science. Now we know everything. We don't need these, silly old religions and superstitions. Forget all of that stuff, right? So there were people who were becoming, bold, brazen-faced desecrators of Shabbos, etc. So it was a major problem. And so there were all kinds of people who were saying, well, like that guy, I don't want to eat his meat. I don't want to do this. I don't want to do that. I don't want him to pour wine. All kinds of rules where, if you lose the legal status of a Jew, he's going to be a Jew forever. He's going to be bound by the laws of the Jews forever. But as we talked, in just certain specific situations where he's not treated like a Jew, but labeling a person that they've lost the status of a Jew, the ruling that was handed down by this big rabbi in the 19th century was, we don't accept that, Eruvin comes to me and says that guy Shimon, he's an apostate Jew, and we shouldn't accept rights from him, and we shouldn't, eat with him or have him at our Shabbos table, or, we should excommunicate him, that kind of stuff. And we should assign to him the status of a non-Jew because of his actions. The ruling was, we don't accept hearsay testimony about somebody else that they've lost their legal status of a Jew. We don't accept that. The only way that we're going to assign that status to a person is if two witnesses come before a beis din, before a court, a rabbinic court, and they're questioned properly about what they saw, when they saw, that they basically have to swear to tell the truth. They have to be qualified witnesses. And so obviously that usually doesn't happen. And so short of that, we do not, look at others and judge them like, oh, that person's lost the status of a Jew. We don't do that. That is not our role. So when we learn these things, it's really to sort of encourage us in our own observance, in our own piety, and to understand how important Shabbos observance is, and that one could be considered, to not have the status of a Jew for certain legal questions, even though he will always be a Jew and he will always be obligated in all the commandments that a Jew is obligated in, and God is always waiting for him to come back. Right? So God is always waiting for the atonement, always waiting for the teshuvah, always waiting for the Jew to say, okay, you know what? I wasn't ready. I was lazy. I was distracted. I had other things going on in my life. I was selfish, whatever. I had my reasons. But you know what? Now I really want to try and make the effort to be a Shomer Shabbos Jew. And by the way, if this might be part of your thinking right now, this is a spectacular time to be thinking that way, because the Shabbos Project is coming up in a few weeks. It's this beautiful Shabbos around the world. The concept is to get all Jews observing Shabbos together. We actually have a teaching that if all the Jews in the world would keep Shabbos twice, the Messiah would come, right? And so right now there's so many Jews not keeping Shabbos. But the Shabbos Project, I don't know what year it's in, 5th, 6th, 7th. I'm not sure how many years they've been doing it. But they're getting people to just commit to keep one Shabbos properly. It's like, so you're not ready to commit to keep every Shabbos properly. Okay. But the Shabbos Project, Nina, maybe you could put the dates in the comments. When is the Shabbos Project? It's in November. But commit to do one Shabbos properly, to turn off the screens and not turn lights on and off, to light the Shabbos candles before Shabbos begins, to have a nice dinner, to say some prayers, to make a blessing over wine and bread. And if you're a Jew, just to keep one Shabbos properly. On the Thursday before that Shabbos, we're going to have a live show with Nina. She's going to teach how she makes challah. I got to tell you, her challah is amazing. So if you haven't made challah before, maybe watch how she makes it. And then you might be inspired to try it yourself. There's going to be, well, I don't know about this year with COVID. It's all going to be at home. In other years, there have been huge challah bakes where hundreds of women get together and bake challah together. And then, hundreds of men who don't normally keep Shabbos will get together and go to Friday night services and sing and just commit to keep one Shabbos properly. It's an amazing experience if you haven't done it before. There she is. She's got the link to the Shabbos Project. Okay. So that's what I've got for us today. Let me check comments and questions. Maybe there are a few. Lots of questions. Okay. Sharon Frantbrooks. What if there is a Jew who shares the courtyard but doesn't feel the need to carry and chooses not to participate? How to deal with them? So that's exactly what this kind of issue is all about. We need his participation. Either he's going to join in the eruv, right? And he's going to allow us maybe even to deposit some food in the basket as his agent. We can do that. We can say, I'm giving you this food. It's your food, but I'm putting it in the basket for you. So he really doesn't have to do anything, but he has to be aware that that's happening. Or he has to renounce his rights and actually not carry, right? And not carry. Although, as we've seen, if we carry before, the guy who promised not to carry, before he then changes his mind and carries, so we've established the eruv. Now, like in LA, we don't have to go around and get individuals to participate in an eruv because we have this massive community eruv. But a lot of cities don't have that, right? So if your city, your town doesn't have a kind of communal eruv established by the Jewish community there, or if your neighborhood is outside, okay, so then it's a different matter. Then you're trying to make the adjustment and get the eruv going. It can be a really beautiful experience, I would imagine. I've never like gone out and created an eruv from scratch in a kind of local basis. But worth knowing that if you live in a single family house, to carry in and out of your yard, this is not an issue, right? To go out onto the street isn't going to work unless you have some kind of community eruv. But if you live in an apartment building and the apartment building has a courtyard, so now you've got the issue. But there's a lot of nuances on this in the modern world. So, that would be worth researching. Carolyn Dobson Chavez. When were the oral traditions, which the Sadducees refused to observe, reduced to writing? Right, so the Mishna was set down about the year 200. And then the next level of commentary on the Mishnah is called the Gemara. But the Gemara plus the Mishnah is the Talmud, right? So the Talmud was set down. It seems like you get different dates depending on where you ask. 5th century, 6th century, more or less call it the year 500. Is when Ravina and Rav Ashi. It was kind of an ongoing project, so it was sort of unclear when it was finished. They didn't publish a book, as it were. It was just like it was set down, and there were various collections. And we didn't have the paginated Talmud until much later, like 1,000 years later, where we had all the volumes set up and page numbers, etc., when there was the first printing in Vilna. When it was really sort of, became like where you could reference what page you're talking about. But basically, the Mishnah was set down around the year 200 of the Common Era, and the Talmud or the Gemara was set down, the first level of commentary on the Mishnah, about the year 500. But the commentary went on and on and on and on, right? So the Tanaim are the rabbis of the Mishnaic period and before. The Amoraim are the rabbis of the Talmudic period or the Gemara period. Then the next set of rabbis, the next generations, are the Geonim, which is like the next 500 years, like from 500 to 1,000. And then from about 1,000 to 1,500. Is the so the Geonim is from about 500 to 1,000, and then from 1,000 to 1,500 is the Rishonim, and then from 1,500 until the present is the Acharonim. And that's why the Art Scroll Talmud is 73 volumes, because in every generation, people are adding commentary to it. They're not adding laws exactly, but when new situations come up over the centuries, well, okay, the greatest authorities in that generation have to rule. Is it permitted? Is it prohibited? Is it obligated? Is it permitted, etc.? And then, those new situations get incorporated into the notes and margins and footnotes and additional footnotes and super commentaries, etc., etc. And that's why it's a living, breathing fountain. It's not a book. It's a fountain of truth and wisdom, stretching all the way back to Mount Sinai. Yosef Shom. When did the Sadducees disappear from history? I don't know. I'm not sure when they went out. I haven't studied that. Some people say that the Karaites are sort of similar, in that they hold by the Torah and certain traditions, but not others. But it's not the same. It's not the same. That's stuff that could definitely be Googled and you could get a nice answer for it. I don't have that at my fingertips. Tom Beck, how does a mummer differ from an apicorus? Excellent question. So an apicorus and a mummer is an apostate Jew. So in our daf today, we're talking about that this is by his actions, right? It's by his actions. The apikorus is a heretic, right? So this is the way these terms are translated into English. But the mummer seems to be somebody that will desecrate Shabbos, and some mumrim are doing it privately, and some are doing it some privately, some publicly, and we've made a distinction today. The heretic, I think the heretic maybe is somebody who wants to argue with the sages and say, no, you're wrong, and here's why you're wrong. And I don't hold by the Torah, and here's why. And it's somebody, it's not enough for him just to not follow the Torah. He's publicly arguing against it. So maybe that's how we distinguish the apikorus. Pam Simmons. Could the deposit into baskets be used to resolve the issue of establishing the eruv with the Sadducee? In other words, could he deposit bread into it? Yeah, I think he could. He's a Jew. And we haven't had the question, may a mummer deposit bread in the eruv? We didn't have that question. So it's a great question. I'm not sure. Maybe that would work. Maybe that would work, but I'm not sure. And Yosef Shum, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi was the one who gave me Yavne. What do you mean gave you? No, but the one who said to the Roman general, to Vespasian, who was besieging Jerusalem, give me Yavne and its sages, that was Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. And he took with him Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel to be the Nasi in that generation. And Shimon ben Gamliel's son must be Rebbe or Rabban Gamliel. I forget right now the exact chain there. But it was Yochanan ben Zakkai who said, give me Yavne and its sages, and then he appointed Shimon ben Gamliel to be the Nasi because he was a descendant of Hillel, of the great Hillel. And Sharon Frant Brooks answered the question. That was right, Yochanan ben Zakkai. All right, I love having such learned people with us in our group. Very often people, can answer a question that I don't have at my fingertips, and I love when we do that. And by the way, I encourage you, there's a lot of us, there's a lot of you who are really regular, like the same names here all the time. And, maybe some of you would like to form partnerships with each other. You've observed other members of AT Daily community. You like the questions they ask. Maybe reach out to them in a private message and set up a little bit of a study group. Maybe you get together by FaceTime or Zoom or something, or phone, just telephone once a week, get together and study something together and have Rusa, have a learning partner. That's a wonderful, wonderful experience, learning one-on-one. It's different than in a classroom because, you and your partner get to talk, each of you half the time. And it's great, and I highly recommend that. And maybe some learning partnerships will be created from this community. That's what I've got for us today. I hope we covered some difficult material. I hope everyone understood. It's really shared with love. We don't do this like almost ever. We're much more about this, giving a hug and a welcome to everybody. But Jews should know, a Jew should know that I didn't make the laws, God made the laws. And if you're a Jew, you're obligated in the commandments. And so maybe give a thought to, getting to that place of being Shomer Shabbos, of keeping Shabbos, of turning all the screens off, not answering the phones, not turning lights on and off, lighting candles before Shabbos, making a blessing over wine, eating some challah with a blessing, etc., and get to the place where you're Shomer Shabbos. It's amazing, amazing, the peace that comes into your life when you stop everything one day every 7 days. It's just wonderful. Can't recommend it enough. And part of that peace will be that, you're finally keeping that commandment. As that old saying goes, more than the Jews have kept Shabbos, Shabbos has kept the Jews. All the best, my holy sisters and brothers.